with a book, maybe.
Which book would that be?
I don't know. I forget. It's all a blur at this point. So.
It is all a blur.
The one that's due in 2 weeks. I think that's the one.
Yeah. Matt.
Less than 2 weeks now, but it's coming along. It's almost done.
Yeah. Matt's actually 18 years old. So
it's a small price to pay.
Yeah, it's good though. So, how was your weekend?
It was good. It was a lot of work on the book, incidentally.
Yeah,
a lot of work sessions on the book. But it is great.
Yeah, it's coming together.
It is. Yeah, it's heartening when you get to this point. You're like, all right, I actually don't need to panic. I just need to finish the work, and then we'll send this out and get it published.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, we were originally going to have Zamak, creator of Data Mesh, on the show this morning. She actually. I can empathize with this spring break with our kid. And so I had that last week and almost forgot. So she'll be back on. She'll be on the show actually Friday, April 22nd. So she'll be on the Friday TGIF show. So looking forward to that. Chatting all things data mesh with her. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, the book so far has been great. I've been reading her book
on
O'Reilly.com, and yeah, fantastic. So.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend people go check out the data mesh book. I think it's definitely one of the big ideas, in data that, it's just, it's rare that you see big ideas coming up, but this is one of them, I think.
Yeah, I think what I would say is I've kind of seen companies starting to do bits and pieces of this before even maybe her original blog posts, but she's the one who really took the ideas and consolidated them, and obviously wrote a book as well, and assembled them in one place and came up with a coherent vision of how this should actually work. And so I think that's very exciting. She herself basically says this is kind of nascent, right? Like at this point, companies are starting to implement some of these details, but it's in the next few years that we'll see more complete implementations, and looking forward to that. So I mean, maybe to some extent, a place like Netflix is kind of doing this, but maybe not completely to her philosophy.
Yeah. It's hard to say.
It's hard to say. I mean, they publish a lot of blog posts on what they're doing internally. They definitely have a notion of like having data spread across the different parts of the organization, sharing internal tools.
Too. Yeah. So I read about their internal tool, and I was like, I guess that's one. But it definitely wasn't, I think, oriented with what Zamak's was going for. They had, I think, it's just an internal tool called that. So, but and if you're listening on LinkedIn, Colleen just dropped the.
Thanks, Colleen.
Yeah. The link to Zamak's book, but it's good.
Yeah,
like I said,
it's great. Yeah,
cool,
check it out.
Big ideas. And speaking of big ideas, Matt, can you move in more?
Sure.
People can see,
my gray beard.
Yeah, I think, it's all Matt all the time.
That's right.
So today I think we want to talk about something that we talk a ton about and get asked a lot about, which is how do I find data engineers today? In Q2 of 2022.
And more broadly, like analysts and data scientists,
general,
data scientists more generally, it's just a crazy tight job market right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah, it's tough right now. And I don't think we entirely have a good answer to this question. We're trying to solve this problem ourselves. But certainly we think there are two answers. And part of it is that data people are just going to be really expensive for a while. And the other part is that you have to be committed to hiring people. Basically, like you're not going to be too successful if you're not training people from scratch. You have to be willing to take people who come from a data adjacent background and assisting them in becoming data people if you want to build up a good bench of talent.
Yeah, for sure. We always refer to this as build versus buy.
Yeah.
So you can buy talent. That's very expensive these days. And I would say, depending on, you better be prepared not just to spend money up front on talent, but also focus on retention, especially for top talent, because a top talent has so many options at this point that even the slightest, thing, they'll just go somewhere else and make more money and probably deal with less BS. So, and what I mean by that is, if you're going to hire talent, make sure obviously the pay is good, but also the intangible stuff too, like working on cool stuff, working with a great team. I got a great manager, all these other things that go into, I would say just basic retention anyway, but for some reason we see, sometimes this is overlooked. So
The other problem that you run into is that every company has this long list of technologies they use, and they'll put out, a job rec, and it won't list like 10 technologies. You can never find a senior person with exactly that experience and exactly that skill set. And so your options are you bring on a senior person, you still have to train them some, or maybe you bring on more of like an early career person and then you train them to the specific tools you need them to use, right? So they have more general data skills. Maybe they've used, I don't know, Spark a lot, but you need them to learn some other tool like Flink, and you just train them into that job, basically. Senior talent, I think it makes a lot of sense for companies. I think you mostly want to focus on hiring senior data talent more to lead and train other people than to actually just do the individual contributor work. I mean, obviously, they're still going to be doing individual contributor work, but they're just so hard to find. And again, you always have this skill misalignment comes up all the time.
All the time. Yeah. Yeah. So I think what we're urging companies to do is figure out ways to become more resourceful with the people that you have. The simple fact is that you're probably not going to find talent. If you do, congratulations. Like you struck gold, and now your challenge is it's almost harder. It's just retention, right? So, but again, it's Svetlana. She has a good point here. Having a job description reflecting what they need, data engineering versus stating as developer with 10 years experience in technology that did not exist 5 years ago. Yep. Totally agree. We can get into this too. I think there's some pretty job descriptions are one of these weird things where I think it's incredibly easy to screw up.
Yeah. In fact, the convention is to screw it up, in my opinion. I think the conventions right now for hiring and job descriptions are kind of terrible in a lot of ways.
They suck.
They're just ridiculous.
Yeah, I think we're being overly nice here.
I think so. Yeah, we're this is a family show. We're not going to say what we actually think.
We should say what we actually think. What do you think? What do you think a good job description should look like?
I mean, I think a good job description should give examples of technology that someone should have experience with. And so what I would want to emphasize is experience with data pipelines, experience with orchestration, experience with certain specific things like Python. But it probably shouldn't say, you have 10 years experience in Spark. So Spark is a tech. It should probably list things that you're going to be doing internally. We use Spark. We use, I don't know, Snowflake, BigQuery, whatever. We want, 10 years of database experience, and we want software development experience, and broad things like this that can then be refined to target the specific technologies the company actually uses. Because again, you're just not going to find people who have exactly, combinatorially, it's impossible to find people who have exactly the skill set that you're after.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. And I would say that you do have a job posting that lists, say, Spark or Snowflake. Be detailed about, to the extent that it doesn't unveil like competitive information, obviously, but talk about some things you'll be expected to be doing with Snowflake or Spark or whatever tool, DBT, not just X number of years. X number of years, I think, is like probably one of the most BS metrics there is. Frankly, I've met people with like 30 years of experience in something. And I'm like, I don't know how you turn on your phone in the morning, let alone show up to work. Like, it's crazy. Because it's more like 6 months of experience times 60 or something.
And the problem is that the culture right now really encourages a lot of like resume overloading. So meaning that people will go, they're like, I need to know Spark, and so they'll go do like 2 Spark quick starts. And then they'll say, I did that a year ago, therefore I have 1 year experience with Spark. And it's like, well, that's not really the same. In fact, I more care about like your general data skills than actually your Spark specific skills. I want to know that you have, and I think we should emphasize more the penchant for learning. In other words, in the job description, say, okay, this is your background. In other words, you have a lot of experience in data technologies. And then by taking this job, you're committed to learning Spark or whatever technology it is, or Airflow or DAX or whatever it happens to be.
I can make an argument that actually crappy job descriptions are sort of a leading indicator of a company's inability to hire good talent, and therefore their necessity to probably build the talent from within. But then it's also a question of, if you're not clear in the requirements of what you're looking for, how would you answer this then? I mean, it's one thing for us to complain about how people suck at life and job descriptions and everything, but how would you suggest that a company goes about formulating its requirements for hiring?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, again, my tendency would be to focus on more generalities, but what are your thoughts on this? I think you have some specific ones. So
I mean, obviously, you need to understand what you're trying to do with the company. That
yeah,
sort of goes without saying. But I would
yeah,
also say that it goes somewhat overlooked, or it gets
yeah.
glossed over more often than I think you and I would personally like.
Mhm.
Um, there may be sort of a an impetus to say, oh well, we need to hire data people, but then it's
Yeah,
like, so what are they going to do, and what are they going to work on, and
yeah,
what's the budget, and what are the expectations? Technology is probably the last thing I'd be looking at. Or are they set up for success? That's
yeah,
the other thing, right? So, and so those are the things I would say you start out with, and then that would kind of dictate the job description from there. And we have quite a few friends that focus on resumes and job descriptions and stuff. And I think our friend Vim Bashida, he does a fantastic job at talking about job descriptions on he calls things out. I think one thing that irks me with job descriptions is like when you say, oh, must be a team player, or just using these empty buzzwords that
yeah,
kind of scream like you don't know what you're writing. So
yeah. It's just filler, basically,
yeah.
just meaningless filler for the most part.
Put yourself in the opposite. Would you want somebody who's not a team player?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm sorry, I'm not a team player. Sorry. I only work alone between the hours of 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. and I don't talk to other people. And
Right.
if you want to hire me,
Although in today's job market, maybe you can get away with that.
You might be able to get away with that. I mean, just be a total prima donna. I mean, maybe in the job description you put, I want a total prima donna developer who's also worth the money or something ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think, but it's a job. I think good job descriptions is one way where you could, and I would think that companies, I look at job descriptions from companies like GitHub, for example, who I think are fantastic job descriptions. To give some examples, I think, Meta has some pretty good job descriptions. All the companies I think are successfully hiring data engineers, I would look at how they're writing their job descriptions and maybe emulate those to a larger extent and not rely so much on your kind of canned corporate, HR, speak, because it doesn't stand out, right? So, but if that's what you have, and even if you do have a great job description, I think that's your first hurdle. Now and this is, again, we're sort of putting this in the reverse where we're talking about, we're looking at it from the perspective of the candidates interviewing you as a company, which is very much the case.
Yeah.
I saw a post yesterday on LinkedIn where some bonehead said, oh yeah, I don't even look at resumes half the time because it's just, everyone lies in the resume. And one of my friends commented, I think it's super disrespectful of you not to read somebody's resume before you interview them. And I completely agree, because it's like what this person failed to realize is the candidate is also interviewing you as a company, right? So that's the bottom line. Like data people have a lot of options, especially if they're any good.
Yeah.
They don't need to deal with any of your BS as a company.
Well, and what about like I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day about how like when did 7 rounds of interviews become the norm? And it's like it's just disrespectful to people's time.
It is.
Them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean,
and the same companies, I know which ones you're talking about.
Yeah.
One of them is complaining, oh, we can't find anybody right now.
Like, well,
it's like, we'd hire 10,000 of them at the moment. I'm like,
yeah, it's like, yeah, make the process somewhat less off-putting, make it more inviting. And when, yes, you have to find ways to screen people and make sure you're hiring the right person, because it's a long-term commitment. It's a lot of money, but yeah, make it more enjoyable for the person, if you can use that word in this context, for the person who's
should be enjoyable,
potentially getting hired, right? Like, and yeah, there's the whole like Basecamp has philosophies about this, about how you should hire people and how you should actually use them as contractors first, so that they actually get paid for their work and they do a project. I mean, that's one possible approach. I don't think anyone's convinced that they have all the answers anymore, but they seem to have some good ideas.
Right. Yeah. It's so again, the title of this is creating new data engineering talent in a tight job market, right? So I think we crossed the checkbox of, okay, you got a good job description. Your interview process is, it's tolerable. You're not wasting people's time. It's, again, what you're doing reflects like what the experience is gonna be like if you go work there, right?
Yeah.
So if you check those boxes and you still aren't finding people, now let's talk about creating new talent in a tight job market. So what are some ways that companies could cultivate talent?
So one is actually very simple, and that is just allow more internal mobility within your company. This is what I'm talking about. If you have managers who are super, super possessive and won't basically block their employees from moving to other teams and trying new things within the company. I mean, I get it, right? You have a person, you're short of talent and you don't want them moving. Fine. At the same time, what inevitably happens if someone's unhappy with their current job or if they're ready to make a new move is they just leave the company instead.
Yep.
So you're much better off letting them be mobile internally and move to a new team, train in a new skill, rather than trying to retain them on your team. Because you don't, I mean, you kind of own that person with their salary, but you don't really. They can just quit anytime they want to. And so make that whole experience friendlier and, have a more open conversation about you're a great developer, but I get that you want to move in a new direction. So I'm going to try to backfill your position. And in the meantime, can you help me out here? And then we'll try to get you trained up in some new skills. One of the richest veins of talent companies have is just people internally. And if they can make that process more streamlined, like do it, like just find ways to help people to be happy and move around and develop in their careers within. I generally find that there is a big gap in data skills between software engineers and data engineers. And it's nothing to do with talent or intelligence or anything else. It's just to do with the fact that software engineers are quite often, if you're developing microservices, just used to handling one data point at a time. And, bulk data, even in a streaming system, is kind of a different paradigm and you have to move. But if you have an internal training program that kind of lets people develop new skills and explore, there's a lot of talent that you can develop without having to hire on the open market.
So I would say, the biggest advantage you would have from hiring from within is the domain knowledge and the internal competencies of how things work. Like that to me is the hardest part to learn. And that just takes time. There's no shortcut around it. I would say that developing the technical acumen is actually, depending on the person, but I would say pound for pound, that's going to be easier. Also depending on how you teach it and how that's relayed to the team. But domain expertise by far takes longer to develop. And so, I mean, the built-in advantage of building talent from within is you already have people who understand your business. To me, that's more important really than somebody who knows a ton about various machine learning algorithms, for example, or how to make awesome data pipelines. That's cool. And that's obviously really helpful for an engineering context, but that person's ability to translate those skills to the business and get real business value, like that to me is worth a lot.
Well, and just having someone onboarded and in your processes and in your culture and having them be networked within the company. In other words, they already know a lot of people, which just knowing people within the company across teams is almost always valuable.
Yeah, that's such a good point, right? Yeah, because that's the other thing we see. I would say like most data projects end up getting torpedoed, not because the team doesn't have the technical acumen, not because it's in a lot of cases it's organizational politics, right? It's the inability to work with other teams. This kind of stuff I would say sinks data projects many times more than we chose our stack isn't the latest and greatest stack, for example. Right. So
the truth is, I mean, we complain about old technology all the time. And yet the reality is you can do great data projects with on-prem data warehouses and all kinds of technologies if you're willing to collaborate and work efficiently and focus on business goals. It's the truth. Maybe you should put up Mark's comment here, which is something just blindingly obvious that people completely ignore.
Yeah. Well, for the audio, for the people on the audio, Mark Healing, with great comments, questions. If hiring from within, you also have to be willing to pay market rate. This is incredibly true. So, So are there any caveats to this?
Okay, so I want to look back for a second. What do you think about the idea of the Great Resignation? I see a lot of debate about whether the Great Resignation is actually statistically real or not. I think we all have anecdotes about the Great Resignation. What's your opinion on this?
I mean, I don't know. I have a lot of opinions, and I don't at the same time have many opinions on it, if you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of these things where I don't know that anyone really knows enough about what happened to say, concretely, this is why people have left their jobs. I think we hear a lot of anecdotes for sure, but I mean, my impression of this is it's basically a trend that was sort of happening already, where people were just kind of fed up, and then COVID gave people the chance to just table flip their entire existence and start over, and I think that's pretty cool. What happens next? I don't know. I mean, at some point, I think people are also going to realize, geez, I don't have any money for retirement, and now I have to go eat cat food. So, but more power to people. I think for putting their destiny back in their control. But so I think in a lot of cases, I think there were a lot of toxic work environments for sure.
That's just it, and that's what I was going to loop back to in general.
I mean, it's retail, and customer facing jobs, for example. Like I worked those when I was younger. I'm going to have my kids work that kind of works when they're of age, because I'm like, I want you to have experience dealing with difficult people in a public setting.
Yeah.
I want you to understand what this is like. If you like doing that, terrific. If you don't, hopefully this motivates you to do something else. So I can totally understand why people have left the service industry, for example. I mean, dear Lord, the number of crazy people out there right now. It's I wouldn't deal with that either. I go find something else to do. And so what you saw there is people move to kind of remote work, and I thought that was cool. And then in the tech industry, a lot of people kind of moved around, and I know a lot of people from the Bay Area that moved to Salt Lake, where we live, and so forth. But I think it's cool.
So I guess my broader comment is that I think Mark is absolutely correct. People can't expect to hire without paying market rates, but I think people are looking for a lot of other things too. And the frank fact is that a lot of these tech companies were making piles and piles of money during the pandemic, and they didn't necessarily treat their employees all that well. So for example, like, okay, you've been working remote for a couple of years, you've been, really killing it at your job, but actually you have to come back next week. And then Omicron breaks out. It's just this huge frustration. And there's a lack of clear messaging on having to come back to work and how that's going to work if there are new waves of COVID. People got really frustrated with that situation. And then you also had the situation where people would go remote and they'd move to another state, and then the employer would come back and say, well, we're cutting your pay because you live in another state now. And it's like, okay, so you're going to, on paper, you say, there's a reason to do this because your cost of living is lower. But it's extremely frustrating for people too, because that messaging was never clear when they all went remote, right? And then all of a sudden you're told that your pay is going to get cut. It's like, well, I'm just going to go get another job then. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Doing things that, I mean, psychologically, our sense of fairness is very, very important for humans. We're not necessarily all that logical in many respects, but if you mess with someone's sense of fairness, like they feel like they're being treated unfairly by an employer, then they're very
that's a
likely to
big
lose their
one,
job.
right?
Yeah.
Well, and I'll give you an example, like the outdoor industry, which is pretty prevalent in Salt Lake. There's a lot of outdoor companies here. By outdoor, I mean, outdoor activities, hiking, skiing, whatever. The outdoor industry is notorious for paying under market rate in general, because it's the outdoor industry and you get a lot of perks, like supposedly, right? But what happened was, I know people in the outdoor industry who during COVID times left or got laid off, and then instantly got another job where they're making twice as much money.
Yeah. And then they're like, wait, if they can find another employer who's willing to pay them more money and they don't have to work insane hours, then they have their own time and money to go be outside, right? And that's another thing. I think a lot of people are probably interested in working hard, but not working quite as much as they used to. I think that's also going to be a factor in hiring. And it's just, I mean, people are in general interested in how the new employer is going to treat them. I think being very clear about that messaging and having very clear expectations about how new employees are going to be treated well if they do their jobs well is important if you want to hire people.
Yeah, it's a big thing. So but back to developing internal talent. So let's say, you've identified people with domain expertise. They're willing, you're willing to pay a market rate. I would say market rate also meaning, like, if you got domain expertise, you don't have data engineering skills, you're probably going to be getting paid what a junior data engineer is going to get paid. Just be realistic. You're not going to get paid some insane FANG wage or something, right? Like, that's not happening. But let's say that, whatever market rate happens to be, what are some ways that these people can learn, or can, I guess, develop data engineering skills? What would you suggest a company does?
Well, I mean, shameless self-promotion here. Go read our book when it comes out. There should be some new pre-release
Hey, look at
chapters
that.
on O'Reilly soon-ish, maybe as early as next
Yeah, and
month. We'll have
revised
more
ones
out.
as well. Yeah.
And then the final release should be somewhere around September.
I heard a rumor we're making courses around this book too.
That is correct.
Yeah, so
I've heard that rumor too. We're definitely doing that.
yeah, so I think that there's, it's interesting because data engineering is one of these fields where the learning path is not, it's not exactly concrete yet. So, and we have some friends I think who have fantastic courses. Andreas Kretz, for example, I think he's the OG in the training space for data engineering. I'd say like his courses are great. But let's talk some general terms. Like one thing we do internally at Ternary is we have a study group. So every Friday we meet, we go over topics. People are asked to present on topics as well. And we really dive into, I'd say, fundamental things, such as, we spent the last month going over security and networking, for example, right? Things that I would say are like more fundamental primitives to data engineering and cloud in general. We train people on internally, we focus on getting certs, for example, certifications in the clouds, AWS, GCP, Snowflake, Databricks, and so forth. And really, we have an environment where we encourage, not just encourage, like learning's mandated. I would say part of that is the type of company we have where, you're as good as the knowledge you have. And so it does us no good to have people who, are not knowledgeable. That'd be ridiculous.
Well, in the consulting space, it's all about skills. It's all about the skills you can bring to the table, especially if you're doing migrations, right? It's like you need to know Snowflake or Spark, BigQuery, the target technology extremely well. And you actually need to know a lot about your sort of source technologies that you're migrating from as well. And so it's a very tricky space. You have to constantly be learning.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Librado asks, when will the courses on the O'Reilly platform be on the O'Reilly platform? Will the courses be on the O'Reilly platform as well? I know I can read. Yes, some. Stay tuned on that. TBD. We're keeping things under pretty tight wraps for now, but I can say that you'll see something on O'Reilly. And then, hey, Revit, what's up? Congrats to the book. Thank you, buddy. So yeah, it's always good to see him. And so it'll be interesting. I think that there's Seattle Data Guy. I think he has a lot of great content too.
Absolutely.
But really, I would say take what a lot of content producers are making, whether it's us or somebody else. But really take a step back, and I would say there's a couple of angles to this. And I was thinking about this over the weekend, based on the discussion we were having, which is, there's I think there's something to be said for maybe developing an apprenticeship type program where you can either onboard internal talent or onboard people who are, maybe early in their career, such as, Abhishek. I hope you're pronouncing your name right. He asked, what are your thoughts of hiring a data engineer analyst who's a fresher or just completed grad? And what skills should be developed to get a good job? I start with the first part. I think that companies should increasingly take a look at hiring people who are, fresh out of school, for the simple fact that by the time if you have a training program in place and an onboarding / apprenticeship type program, you can develop people. You have an advantage in a lot of ways by doing this. You have the advantage of these fresh grads, fresher is like a term in India, I think. But they don't really have any bad habits to unlearn that may have been like ossified by working at a company for a number of years. Every company you work at, you are going to develop certain habits, certain cultural patterns, certain ways of thinking about the world. Hopefully you had a good experience, because when you go to a new company, you might most likely have to unlearn those habits and learn new ones based upon how the new company does things and the culture there. But if you're fresh out of school, the hiring company has the I'd say an advantage in the sense where you don't have very many bad habits to unbreak. And so I'd say that's a big one. So what I'm saying is companies should take a chance on fresh talent. I know we tend to hire more for aptitude and potential versus whether or not you worked at Airbnb, Facebook, whatever. Like that's super duper cool.
Well, it's also very expensive.
It's expensive,
right?
but it's also
clear.
not really relevant either.
Yeah,
you work on specific problems at specific companies.
Yep.
And so I think that's now, of course, there's a two-part question to this, of course. And so I think we're in agreement that assuming a company has an onboarding process to either bring on internal employees or graduates, this is a good idea. What skills should be developed to get a good job? I think that really depends on the type of company and specifically the company you're looking to get hired by. Do you have thoughts on the second part of this question?
Well, so actually part of what I was going to say here is that I think code schools have actually been fairly successful in preparing people for the job market in a surprising way. Like it's not an end-all be-all solution, but they have done a good job of getting people into good jobs. I have several friends who've gotten into the tech industry through code schools, even without a bachelor's degree, without college. They've done quite well. But I think what's always missing is that there are a lot of skills that you need to develop on the job. There's just you can do SQL exercises all day long. It's a very different experience when someone tells you to create a specific report that reflects specific business logic, or when someone tells you to create a production data pipeline. And that's where I think we need to move more toward integration of more academic training, like code schools, with apprenticeships, like you're saying.
I agree. Really I mean, we both teach at university, and you. I mean, Matt was a former math professor for a number of years, so I'm a nerd. He knows a thing or two about teaching, right? I know something about teaching. I think but in the classes that we teach now, I mean, so Matt and I, we teach, we teach grad school at the University of Utah. We were hired mostly because of our industry experience and our ability to translate that industry experience into teaching students skills they will likely need on the job. I recall getting this job because I made the comment to somebody there where I felt like the students were graduating, I would say, with very theoretical skills and not a lot of real world know-how. And by this, I mean skills like requirements gathering, talking to people, trying to understand, the question behind the question, as well as you point out, like working on a task, under a deadline that's perhaps got some ambiguity to it, right? I mean, and so these are the types of things I would say, what skills should you develop to get a good job? I would say when you are looking for work, if you can demonstrate that you have these other types of skills, asking good questions, requirements gathering, good communication, that's going to get you a long way in your career. Yep. I've read studies where like maybe 5 to 10% of your career success is based upon your technical talent. A lot of it has to do with your ability to communicate, work the political system, to be frank, and all the other stuff that seems kind of grody. But that's the real world.
Well, and politics aren't all gross, let's be frank. I mean, like quite often as a data engineer, you're working close to infrastructure, right? And so that means that you need to work across teams. So you might be kind of doing your own DevOps. That actually comes up a lot, which is why we care about things like networking, because data engineers often have to do this stuff themselves in the cloud. But quite often you're working with another team that handles a lot of the infrastructure. And you need the skill of being able to negotiate with someone and say, okay, what's your team going to do? What's my team going to do? How can I help you to get your job done? How can you help me to get my job done? That doesn't happen when you're in school. I mean, maybe you have a team project where 3 people work together.
You have a capstone project.
Which is, that's great. That stuff is useful, but it's just it's a big leap to go into the business world. And suddenly there's almost like this management aspect of things, even if you're not a manager, where you're an individual contributor, but you have to work with people to get stuff done. You're not just given a task in a vacuum to work on. You got to work across teams, within teams. Yeah, that's a whole set of skills that you need to develop. And in terms of concrete coding skills, it's funny, like in our SQL class, we make people do all these crazy parsing exercises, like parsing dates and parsing out data, which people find extremely annoying. And I understand that. However, even if you're a data scientist, this comes up all the time. Like you get some raw CSV file and you got to get that data into native data types within pandas or whatever. Like that's,
I'll never forget a review that we got for our class. Somebody gave us like I think the lowest rating you could possibly get. It was a 1 star out of 5 or something, because we taught things that we do in our day-to-day jobs. And I was like, so it reminded me a lot of the I don't know if you saw the billboards for Snowbird, the ski resort here, where they had the 1-star review that said it's too challenging. The terrain's like really difficult. And so Snowbird used that on their billboards, you know, and I think that if we had the equivalent for our class, it would be the same, where, you know, but it's hard, you know, if you don't know what real world skills to develop, you know, it's a catch-22, right?
It is.
So,
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think the other thing I would like to see more of, so first of all, more apprenticeships, where maybe it's just an internship, even maybe it's not even an official commitment to hire that person as an FTE. But I think companies really benefit by carving out those internship programs. The reality is that any team that's really harried and like has a lot of work to do and is under-resourced doesn't like to have interns, because interns take time. But it's that long-term investment that's ultimately going to pay off.
But that's a good point, though. Maybe maybe some companies don't have the time to make a long-term investment. That's perfectly fine. We're not saying this is like the prescription. But what I would say, when you onboard anybody, though, you should have an assigned mentor. You know, that's one thing I think, you know, we're increasingly finding would benefit, I think, teams, both for us and for, you know, a lot of our clients, is if you bring somebody on, like there needs to be a directly responsible individual who like mentors this person, shows them the lay of the land, shows them the systems, how do things work, shows them the documentation, and more importantly, introduces them to new teams and integrates them into the fabric of the company. Without that, where we've seen, you know, creating data engineering talent, you know, fall flat is you bring in, you know, a new person out of grad school, throw them in, you know, to say, okay, we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
that's a recipe for disaster. That is not a good idea.
Yeah, no, not at all, not at all. And another thing I would add is that remote work has created some new challenges, because I think a lot of these things we took for granted before, because just organically people would walk by each other's desks, they'd talk, they'd meet, and now they just see each other in Zoom meetings, and these Zoom meetings are very task focused for good reason, but they're not like just doing this general socialization, talking about bigger strategy and, you know, how to make the company successful. Those meetings aren't happening as much because you just don't have these like ad hoc organic meetings popping up like you used to. And so you got to be more focused on that type of training and integration into the company.
Yeah. And so for the training, I would say a lot of it's going to depend upon what your specific, you know, systems and workflows and goals are. But I think we can give some suggestions. You know, in our book, I mean, we cover the whole data engineering lifecycle, for example. You know, understanding what the source systems are, understanding how the data is going to be stored for downstream use cases like analytics, machine learning, reverse ETL, and so forth. Now, you know, then ingesting data, transforming, modeling it. Data modeling is a big thing. You know, I think it's a bit underrepresented these days. Querying data. So how do you query data with your systems? And how do you serve the data to downstream users? I mean, all these are aspects where I think you should develop some materials around and document. Okay, so, you know, in this life cycle, this is how our systems work. That'll give people the context to understand, you know, the deeper technical details of your systems. I would say the bad way to go about it is saying, okay, so we use BigQuery, right? And so learn how BigQuery works, and learn SQL. I think that is a partial answer, but it doesn't tend to describe the entire workflow that you'll encounter as a data engineer.
Yeah, the technology is important, but yeah, you need to. It's funny. Too often we've seen technology and data engineering exist in kind of this abstract vacuum. I mean, you know, 10 years ago, everyone was very, very excited about Hadoop and what Hadoop
I'm still excited about Hadoop.
But there's nothing wrong with that technology. I mean, at this point, it seems a bit dated, but the point is there was less focus on like, how is this actually going to help the company make money? As much as we don't want to be focused on money, that's what pays our salaries. Like that's what solves money problems.
Right.
So.
And so I would say, you know, have a curriculum, you know, bring it back to the technology, but also bring it back to the business problems, as you're saying, right? Like how are we creating value with what we're doing? And then the suggestion too is, at a minimum, have a weekly study group where you get your senior data engineers, your new data engineers, your apprentices, whatever, together, in an environment where they have psychological safety to learn.
Yeah.
That's a key thing, though. You want people to have psychological safety where they can ask good questions and not be afraid of failure. Because as a newbie, especially, an apprentice or a new data engineer, you are going to make mistakes. Right. And so that's going to happen. So just expect it. Have the psychological safety to do it. And the seniors and then the mentors need to create that environment for you. You can't be chastised for breaking stuff. If you break stuff, obviously, I think it's up to the senior data engineer. So figured out fail safes to like rewind it and make sure these aren't like one-way doors, so to speak, right? You always want to have two-way doors, reversibility in your architectures. So if you do make a mistake, you can get back in one piece. The other, I think, when we were talking with Lauren in the podcast a week ago, I always kind of mentioned, like, when I teach my kids how to rock climb, especially when they go bouldering up high stuff, I'm like, always look at the way down first. How are you going to get off if you get up? So getting to the top of a boulder doesn't really help you if you can't get down now. So, or a climb or whatever. But the same thing is with the architecture that you build. And so, but you need to, dummy proof it, not just for yourself, but for people who are going to be using these systems. And so that's up to the senior engineers to do. But I don't know, what else did you include in the curriculum?
Oh, that's a good question. In a curriculum, some rather banal things that you were alluding to just now, actually, and that's things like more agile processes. So, for example, I often see that in data engineering, people have certain, let's call them slightly outdated ideas about how things should be deployed.
Oh, you don't have an opinion about this at all.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. I mean, and it kind of makes sense, right? Like, it used to be that if you wanted to deploy a data warehouse, you were talking like a 6-month long review process with multiple vendors and then sign a multi-million-dollar contract. And now I can actually just go turn on 3 technologies in an afternoon and try them out. So you want to train data engineers in the agility that's offered by the cloud. I know that's a buzzword. Agility is totally a buzzword, but it's also a real thing. It just means that you can turn on these technologies and try them very quickly. It also means that you can roll out your infrastructure gradually. Like, once you decide on technologies, you can gradually add different pieces to these technologies. And then going back to reversibility, two-way doors, psychological safety, just code reviews. And that's actually, code reviews are a really critical part of the training process.
What about pair programming?
Pair programming is an excellent idea. And especially where we're remote and where you're not just swinging by someone's desk, like, you got to make it a bit more formal and say, you guys go pair program and get on a Zoom call or whatever and pair program.
I would also say, like, rotating and embedding people into new teams is a good idea too, for a lot of reasons. And so one thing I think for data engineers, one thing I think is really important that's sort of overlooked is go work alongside a data analyst or a data scientist, right? Because you need to understand what the outcome is, right? If you're just producing data and you're not sure how it's being used, I think that's not terrific, and you're probably going to fall short in your job.
Yeah. I mean, we often joke about being recovering data scientists, right? Which it sounds like we're just trash talking data science, but that's not actually the intention. The intention is to say that data science is one of the major motivations for data engineering. And I think it's made us better at the job because we actually understand what's needed and what's required. We're not just operating in a vacuum. Yeah. I think actually working as a data scientist on a data science team for a while would make a lot of sense. Maybe you're more focused on some of the data engineering tasks like parsing and munging, but you're going to understand a lot about how data scientists do their jobs. And
I kind of view the world through, like, a mixed martial arts lens, so to speak, right? Where it's it's one thing to be good at, like, boxing or Muay Thai or something, but wrestling, but you got to combine everything together. I think that makes you a complete data person. I agree. It just helps a lot. Like, data, we always say data is a full contact sport. Now, I mean this in like a fighting sense. I mean this in, like, literally, it's a full contact sport where you're engaging with the business, you're engaging with technology, you're engaging with stakeholders, and so forth, right? Like, this isn't a job where you kick back in your silo. Hopefully, if you do, then I guess that's what you're into, or that's what your job entails. But I would say the successful data teams we've seen, it is very much a full contact sport. So, like rugby or something.
But, I mean, I think, like, casual competitions are great, but the reality is that very few people are just going to be working on their own trying to solve a problem as a data scientist or a data engineer. It's very, very collaborative. I mean, working together.
Casual competitions remind me a lot of, like, reading books on how to, like, make friends and go on dates and stuff. It's like, it's like, you can also, I mean, it helps, but you should also go and, like, actually go talk to people. So, yeah, I think a lot of these things is just a bit too sanitized. Yeah, Malcolm has I think I'm pronouncing your name right here. Good question here. So how would you prepare an undergrad for a data job?
And so I think it's all these things we've talked about, and it's partially that as an undergrad, you need to get any kind of internship you can, because then you're going to be in a company actually working.
But how do you get the internship?
Data. It's really tricky, right? It's hard because these internships are somewhat limited. I think there are two parts to this equation. As an undergrad, go look for internships, and as a company, if you have the resources, try to create internships, because in the long term, I think those are really going to pay off. They're not going to pay off like next month, but a year from now, you're going to be happy that you did it, because your pipeline will be much, much bigger for hiring talent.
But to solve this problem, though, I think it really is incumbent upon companies to be a lot more accepting of working with undergrads, right? Because I mean, I think there's innumerable ways as an undergrad to prepare for a data job, but that's not the same thing as you getting a data job, right? Just like me preparing for the Olympics isn't going to guarantee that I get to the Olympics. There's a lot that goes into it.
Right.
So I mean, back to the question of how would you prepare? I would say meet people in industry, make contacts, make connections.
Go to meetups.
Okay, so anti-patterns. What would you say is like a way that would really screw you over if you finish your undergrad and we're looking for work?
I mean, just do the opposite, right? Don't network with anyone. Don't focus on internships. Just focus on your classes all the time. You can get amazing grades, and you're not necessarily going to do too well in getting a job.
We see this a lot, actually. Yeah.
I mean, okay, to be fair, I think there are kind of two pipelines, right? The tradition in Silicon Valley was to hire people out of undergrad with no experience who had these really great degrees from Stanford or Berkeley. Maybe that's still true to some extent, but the reality is that's not how most companies outside of Silicon Valley really operate. They want people.
Yeah, but it's still like a lottery, though. I mean,
it is a lottery.
Your acceptance rate for these internships at one of these big companies is still...
with Google, with edFang companies, really, really tricky. And you want to like hedge your bets by getting practical experience. Another thing I might add is that the industry really has changed and become more accessible, because 20 years, 1999, let's say, if you wanted to try out Teradata, how could you do that? Well, it was virtually impossible if you didn't have a job. If you wanted to try out Teradata or Oracle, or one of these like a data warehouse system of some sort, it simply was not possible if you didn't have a job at a big company with a multi-million-dollar data budget. And now I can go in and I can turn on Snowflake, I can turn on Databricks, I can turn on BigQuery and just try it out. I would say getting hands-on experience with these real-world tools in the cloud is very, very useful. And you can we talked before about portfolios. Having a portfolio that uses real-world technology is extremely useful for getting a job.
Yeah, it is. In fact, on that note, if you go to ternarydata.com and go to the news, we have an article called How to Create a Data Engineering Portfolio That Will Land You a Job. And we also have an associated video with that. So I would say check this out. And also, our friends, was that actually showing or not? Actually, no, I couldn't show it. Never mind. Sorry for people who were trying to look for it, but the Chrome settings are not working right now. But yeah, I would say we have just search for data engineering portfolio. Our article and video comes, I think, at the top of the search results or there close to that. Seattle Data Guys also got some great content on this. Andreas Kratz, it's, but again, like a data engineering portfolio, it's awesome. There's some nuance to this where it's kind of like plumbing in some ways where, say you build a data pipeline, it's going to be a lot harder to describe that than say, oh, I have this notebook where I can just show you how I built, this model and here's the results and so forth. Thanks, Colleen, for putting the link up here.
Perfect. But I think what you can do is draw architecture diagrams. I mean, use a tool like Lucidchart or Miro to create some architecture diagrams of how the data is flowing, and then explain the steps. And like, okay, I'm in Spark, and then I'm processing this raw CSV file, and then I output this Parquet file into S3 over here, or whatever it is. Explain all your steps. And if I'm a hiring manager, I'm actually going to find that fairly impressive because it's unusual. I think most people coming out of undergrad computer science programs are getting good software development experience, but they're just kind of working on a laptop and writing some Java code or something. And it's a very different thing to see that someone has concrete experience on.
Yeah, I mean, Malcolm has a good comment here. Yeah. I took the challenge to build a computer science program from scratch at a liberal arts school. I have the opportunity to share this department from scratch. The students are willing, but getting an internship is not easy for them. Again,
It's tough.
So yeah, I mean, this is, I think, our plea to the industry is, you know, I guess be more open to the ideas that you're going to have to build talent. Like, unless you have the budget, or unless you have, the popularity to attract top talent, you're probably not going to find it. That's just the reality of it. Or you're not going to be able to retain it. What you have a better chance of doing is developing the pipeline of candidates, both from internship and apprenticeship perspective, internal candidates, external candidates, and really build a team from scratch. I think this is going to be easier than putting a job posting out, having your recruiting team trying to, search the earth for top talent. If you get it, terrific, good for you. I just know that your chance of getting this right now, is probably not great. Now, of course, there's a caveat that it might be a recession looming. And
We'll see.
What this might mean for the startup world is, that means that there very well could be talent on the market. But that said, I think just given the number of open positions right now, you're going to fill some of the jobs, but not all of them.
Yeah, and I think you have to have some senior people. I mean, you have to have people who have experience building pipelines and systems to start the whole process. But focus on hiring a handful of senior people who are not just individual contributors, but can actually run an internship program and train other people. And the reality is, the unpleasant reality is that a lot of tech is very, very blue collar. And by that, I mean that there's just like a lot of kind of low level grunt work that you have to do, whether you're a data scientist or software engineer or a data engineer. And ideally, what you have is senior people who guide and direct younger talent in doing this grunt work, but also learning the job so that eventually they can become really senior, very competent people.
Yeah, I mean, every senior was at one, at one point
start somewhere.
Started somewhere, right?
Yep.
We had to start somewhere, and I always feel like I'm starting over every day, to be frank. I mean,
yeah.
So, but I have the privilege of saying that now that I am, senior, but I can have a beginner's mind and all that stuff. But a lot of people, are beginners, and that's just the reality of it. And I hope to give these, everyone here a shot. So on that note, again, check out our book. This will teach you everything you need to know about data engineering.
It's a good start.
It's a good start. Yeah. And expect some courses coming up around this. I think we take a much different approach in that we're not focusing on particular technologies. We'll certainly use those as examples, but I think what's been missing in the ecosystem has really been the focus on sort of the fundamentals. Really, it's when we look back, I would say writing a book on data engineering with Python, for example, that would be an easy book to write. That would be easier than what we wrote.
Yeah, and those books are important, but don't get us wrong. So in other words, what you need is the top level picture of data engineering. And then if you are going to be using Python for data engineering, you need to go back and read the book about Python for data engineering. But yeah, it's much more concrete, right? Like, you can just write out a set of examples, basically, of different topics and have people work through them.
Mm-hmm. Mark has a good point here. One way to learn data engineering is to work on a team that has no idea what they're doing. Oh, Lord. Then you feel the pain and are motivated to look for solutions. Yes, motivated to look for solutions or another job. But I think it's actually a really good point. I think this might be one of the more common paths.
Yeah, people just get thrown into it all the time.
Well, who knows data engineering?
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, I mean, that's a serious question. So who, in our experience, when we talk with teams, I mean, who actually do you think, how many people do you really feel know data engineering?
A handful.
It's I think so. Rare. I think people know bits and pieces of it. I wouldn't say that, and the only reason I say this is because, when Matt and I started writing the book, we thought we knew data engineering. It turns out we don't know much anything, and the experience forced us to really think what the field is. I would say we're much different at this point. I would say we probably have a good idea, but I'd say that we have a lot of peers that probably have a good idea, but pound for pound, if you go into a company, the person who would have I think comprehensive data engineering knowledge is actually very, very low.
Yeah, and I think another thing that motivated us significantly is this democratization of data engineering. And what I mean by that is that, well, again, it goes back to kind of this multi-million-dollar conversation, right? Having data warehousing, having data engineering used to be a multi-million-dollar proposition. It was very expensive. And in the last couple of years, we've seen these very small companies be able to deploy data engineering because you have all these cloud tools where they're managed, and you don't have to have someone who knows low-level internals to start doing data.
Yep.
But we did have to train a lot of people to say, okay, how do I orchestrate data processes? How do I ingest data? How do I build basic ETL data pipelines? And I'm no longer managing a cluster of on-prem servers. I've gotten out of that work, but I still have to do the core work of moving data through the stages and delivering it and serving it to make it valuable.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, George, what's up? He's cool. Kind of wrapping up here.
Sorry, Mark's commenting.
Yeah, he's killing us today. Good interview question. We want to implement the following architecture. Show a really bad infrastructure idea. What do you think of our ideas?
It's kind of a gotcha question. The problem is that someone's going to be stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, they're going to be reluctant to criticize your idea. On the other hand, so that they'll either like, oh, that looks great.
Yeah, but I think that's a good filter though in itself. Because I want somebody who's going to be blunt. I don't want somebody to say, oh, that looks like a great idea. Just use Lambda step functions for everything.
From in S3.
Yeah.
Have Lambda's query S3.
Right. Yeah. That's and we'll use Aurora for everything too. No, I would say it's sort of like Van Halen's Brown M&M test. Remember that back in the day? So for the audience, Van Halen, who was a popular 80s rock band,
passed away recently, right?
Eddie Van Halen passed away recently. Yeah. It sucks. Rest in peace, man. But you know, their contract writer for the concerts, they in their dressing room, they needed a bowl of brown M&Ms. I think it was brown. But or they had to be taken out, one of the two. But either way, it was
something ridiculous.
But it was basically like it was a show that it seemed prima donna on the surface. But what the deal was is that if somebody followed those instructions, they probably got everything else right.
Yeah.
But it was a litmus test, because if they didn't get it right, there's a potential that the stage itself could be dangerous.
Or any number of things, right? Right. All this equipment, it's got to handle thousands of pounds.
And so I actually think what Mark's proposing here is a good idea. It's sort of the Brown M&M test, where it's like, I'm going to intentionally show you a really screwed up architecture, and then you're going to, and if you're honest, if you provide good ideas, to me, this is like a really good litmus test. Because if you just say, oh yeah, that looks great. Like, not hiring this person for a lot of reasons.
There's a lot of posturing in tech, right? We see it all the time. Where people
tons.
AI chatbots will handle all our data, and we're going to just run it all through big data tools, and we'll operate at petabyte
Let's run our data warehouse in SageMaker.
Okay, but how do we actually solve problems?
Solving problems, man. It's a big thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Coming up on time. Thanks to the audience for the fantastic conversation. I know Matt and I just kind of winged this conversation. Like I said, we're expecting to we're planning to talk all data mesh today with Zamak, the founder of Data Mesh, but we're going to postpone that conversation for a couple weeks. She'll be on Friday, April 22nd at 1 p.m. for the Friday show. Speaking of Friday shows, this Friday we have it's a Utah event. We have Mariah Peterson and Todd Hansman, Utah locals who I think we both greatly respect. We're just going to be talking about data, probably the local Utah scene. So if that interests you, cool.
Should we talk about the Thursday event? I talked about it.
Oh yeah, Thursday, right? So so our friends at Starburst, is it here? Yeah. So we're doing. If you're in Salt Lake City, feel free to join Ternary Data and Starburst at a TF Brewing Company in downtown Salt Lake. We're doing drinks and data, and food. Even if you and food, and if you don't drink, still show up.
Come hang out. And if you're recruiting, come hang out. We have potential. I mean, who knows? There'll just be lots of people there, even people you may want to talk to for interviews.
But we're trying to do more of these in-person events. So please show up this Thursday to that. You can RSVP. Go to our site or and go RSVP there. So show up to that if you're in Salt Lake. And also, speaking of which, next Thursday, we're doing an event with Fivetran and Snowflake at Topgolf. So expect an announcement on that imminently. That's going to be a lot of fun. What else we got going on? Next Monday morning data chat, I believe we have Emily Shario. She's a VC over at Amplify Partners, and somebody whose opinion I greatly respect. So that's going to be a great show. And other than that, Matt and I are going to be heads down working on the book and not missing out. So appreciate everyone who's supported the book so far, given us ideas, reviewed it. I think we have an awesome stack of reviewers. We've definitely gotten our butts kicked and the reviews a lot, which I think is awesome.
It's a good sign.
I think it's, yeah, you want that. I mean, it's kind of like, I look at it like sparring partners. Like you want like the tough sparring partners. You don't want somebody who's going to slap you.
You got to justify your ideas, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes your ideas need to change if you're off base.
Yeah. We had some tough people. So this is awesome. So yeah, that'll be good to get that knocked out. Then, let me see what else going on here. Oh, by the way, we're Ternary Data. We offer data architecture and data engineering consulting. So contact us at Ternary Data. We can help you with the architecture, data engineering best practices. Who better to ask than the people who wrote the book on data engineering? So yeah, we are a data engineering and architecture consulting firm. So give us a shout out if you need some help in this area. So, all right, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later. All right. Thanks, audience. See ya.
Take care.